Chapter 1: The Shadow in the Night. The city slept under a shroud of darkness, disturbed only by the occasional sound of sirens in the distance. Jack Malone, a veteran detective with the Los Angeles Police Department, was in his office, a cigarette slowly burning in the ashtray as he reviewed old cases, trying to keep at bay the ghosts that always haunted him. It was an ordinary night until the phone rang, breaking the silence. "Malone," he answered, his voice hoarse from fatigue and smoke. "We have a body in Violet Alley. You better see this for yourself," said the voice on the other end, belonging to Sergeant Davis, his contact in the police department. Jack stubbed out the cigarette, put on his coat, and stepped out into the cold night. Arriving at the crime scene, the smell of fresh blood mingled with the foul odor of the alley assaulted his senses. The body of a young woman lay on the ground, her eyes staring into nothingness, her pale skin contrasting with the vivid red spreading around her. "What the hell happened here?" Jack asked the officer on duty. "We found this with her," Davis replied, handing him a blood-stained note. "Looks like we have a message from our killer." Jack read the note, his brows furrowing as he recognized the meticulous handwriting. "The game has begun, detective. Let's see how far you can go." Beside the body, a black rose, as dark as the night, lay as a morbid symbol. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't the first time he had encountered a black rose. His thoughts drifted back to an unsolved case from 5 years ago, when another series of murders had shaken the city. He knew he was dealing with someone meticulous, someone who enjoyed toying with the police. As photographers took pictures and technicians collected evidence, Jack looked around, trying to absorb every detail of the scene. The flashing lights of the police cars cast long, distorted shadows on the brick walls of the alley. He knelt beside the body and examined the wounds. Each cut seemed to have been made with surgical precision, indicating a deep knowledge of human anatomy. "He's challenging us, Davis. This isn't an amateur," Jack said, standing up and putting the note in his coat's inner pocket. "We need to find out who this girl is. Someone must know something." The night wore on as Jack began his investigation. He talked to local residents, frequenters of the alley, and anyone who might have seen something. Few were willing to speak, fearful of reprisals, but an old man, a homeless person who often roamed the area, offered a clue. "I saw a guy in a hat and long coat. He was lurking around here last night. There was something strange about him, you know? Like he was waiting for something." The old man murmured, his eyes wide with fear. Jack thanked him and noted the description. He had to start somewhere, and a man in a hat and long coat was a start. As he walked back to his car, the feeling of being watched never left him. The shadows seemed denser, and every sound seemed amplified. The detective knew this was just the first piece of a macabre puzzle. The hunt for Los Angeles's most wanted serial killer had begun, and Jack Malone was determined to win it, no matter the cost. Chapter 2: The Cat and Mouse Game. The city lights shimmered in the distance, but for Jack Malone, everything seemed shrouded in shadows. The death of the young woman in Violet Alley was just the beginning of a series of nightmares he was about to face. The sun had barely risen when he arrived at the morgue to speak with the medical examiner, Dr. Emily Carter. "Do you have anything for me, Emily?" Jack asked, lighting a cigarette as he observed the body on the cold table. "The victim is a Jane Doe, no identification. The killer was meticulous, precise cuts, no signs of a struggle." "He knew exactly what he was doing," Emily replied, not taking her eyes off the body. "And this black rose, it's like he's leaving a signature." Jack nodded, the cigarette smoke enveloping his face. "He's sending us a message. He wants to be found, but at the same time he's challenging us." Back at the precinct, Jack met with his team. The clues were few, but he knew that every detail mattered. The conference room was covered with photos and maps, each marked with the locations where the victims had been found. "We need to find a connection between the victims," Jack said, looking at Laura Bennett, his partner. "Something that tells us why he chose them." Laura nodded and began reviewing the files. "I'll check if any of the victims had any ties to the same place or person. That could be our starting point." Days turned into nights as Jack and his team delved into the investigation. The streets of Los Angeles seemed darker and more dangerous, as if the killer's presence had cast a shadow over the city. And then, it happened again. Jack's phone rang in the middle of the night. Another body, Jack. Same signature. "We need you here," said Davis, the urgency in his voice evident. This time, the victim was a young man found in a park. The same surgical precision in the cuts, the same black rose beside the body. Jack knew he was dealing with someone who had a deep knowledge of anatomy, possibly someone in the medical field. Back at the precinct, Jack studied the maps, looking for a pattern. That's when he noticed something. The crime locations form a perfect circle. He's guiding us towards something. Laura entered the room holding a dossier. "Jack, I found something. All the victims frequented the same coffee shop in the city center. This might be our connection." Jack took the dossier and quickly flipped through it. "Good find, Laura. Let's investigate this coffee shop and see what we uncover." The next morning, Jack and Laura went to the coffee shop. The place was crowded, full of people coming and going. They spoke with the manager, who seemed nervous about the police presence. "Yes, I remember those people. They were regular customers," said the manager, sweating. "But I can't imagine why someone would do something like this." While Laura talked to the manager, Jack observed the patrons. His eyes landed on a man in a hat and long coat, sitting in the corner, watching them. The man noticed Jack's gaze and quickly left. "Laura, we have to follow that man. Now," Jack said, running out of the coffee shop. They tailed the man through the busy streets, but he seemed to vanish into the shadows at every turn. When they finally lost sight of him, Jack felt the frustration mounting. "He's toying with us, Laura. He knows we're after him, and he's challenging us," Jack said, breathing heavily. Laura put a hand on Jack's shoulder. "We'll catch him, Jack. We're getting closer. We just need to keep going." As night fell over Los Angeles, Jack knew the cat and mouse game was just beginning. The killer was out there, watching, waiting for the next move. And Jack Malone was determined not to let this shadow escape. Chapter 3: Faces in the Crowd. Los Angeles continued its feverish routine while Jack Malone and his team investigated the string of murders. Every clue seemed to lead to a dead end, but Jack knew the key to solving the mystery was somewhere, hidden in the shadows of the city. The clock struck 7 in the morning as Jack entered the precinct, unshaven and with a tired look. Laura was already there, a stack of files on the table. "Jack, I've managed to identify some suspects who frequented the coffee shop. There's something odd about all of them," Laura said, handing him a dossier. Jack opened the dossier and analyzed the profiles. 3 people caught his attention. 1. Frank Sullivan, an ex-convict, sentenced for assault and attempted murder. Recently released from prison, Sullivan had a violent history and an alibi that didn't hold up. 2. Dr. Leonard Harris ***, a criminology professor at the local university, known for his morbid interest in serial killers. Harris had an eccentric demeanor and loved discussing theories about serial murderers. 3. Evelyn Brooks, a mysterious woman who regularly frequented the coffee shop, but nobody knew much about her. Always alone, she seemed to avoid any interaction. Jack decided to start with Sullivan. He and Laura drove to the ex-convict's apartment, a rundown building on the east side of the city. They knocked on the door, and a burly man with tattoos on his arms opened it. "Mr. Sullivan, may we have a word?" Jack asked, showing his badge. Sullivan glared at them with disdain but opened the door. The apartment was a mess, with empty bottles scattered around and a strong smell of cigarettes. "What's this about?" Sullivan asked, lighting a cigarette. "We're investigating a series of murders and found out you frequented the same coffee shop as the victims," Jack said, observing the man's reactions. "I did, yeah. But that doesn't make me a killer," Sullivan responded, blowing out smoke. "Do you have an alibi for the nights of the murders?" Laura asked, jotting something down in her notebook. Sullivan hesitated, his eyes shifting momentarily. "I was home, alone. No one can confirm it." Jack and Laura left the apartment without any useful information. Sullivan was violent, but he seemed to be just one piece of the puzzle. The next stop was Dr. Leonard Harris's house. The professor's residence was an old mansion, filled with books scattered everywhere and diagrams of crime scenes on the walls. "Detectives, come in. I'm always willing to help with interesting investigations," Harris said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dr. Harris, we're investigating serial murders. We know you've studied this topic extensively," Jack began. "Yes, fascinating, isn't it? The mind of a serial killer is a labyrinth of mysteries. I study to understand, not to imitate," Harris replied with disturbing enthusiasm. As they talked, Jack noticed a notebook on the table with detailed notes about the recent crimes. "May I see this?" he asked, pointing to the notebook. "Of course, it's just a collection of observations," Harris said, handing over the notebook. The notes were incredibly detailed, as if the author had been present at the crime scenes. Jack felt a chill, but there was nothing there that proved Harris's guilt. Finally, Jack and Laura went to meet Evelyn Brooks. They found her in a cafe near the university, sitting alone, reading a book. "Ms. Brooks, may we have a word with you?" Laura asked. Evelyn looked at them, her green eyes shining with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Sure. What's this about?" "We're investigating recent murders. We noticed you frequented the same coffee shop as the victims," Jack said. Evelyn smiled slightly. "I like to observe people, detective. That doesn't make me a killer." "Observe them? Why is that?" Laura asked, intrigued. "Because people are open books, detective. You just need to know how to read," Evelyn replied enigmatically. The conversation didn't lead to a definitive conclusion, but Jack felt Evelyn knew more than she was willing to reveal. With more questions than answers, he and Laura returned to the precinct. "These people are all strange in some way, but we have nothing concrete," Jack said, frustrated. Laura nodded. "We need to keep going. Maybe the connection is something we haven't seen yet." As night fell over Los Angeles, Jack knew the killer was out there, possibly even watching their moves. The cat and mouse game continued, and he was determined to find the next move. Chapter 4. The Informant. The darkness of the night enveloped Los Angeles as Jack Malone gazed out of his apartment window. The city seemed calm, but he knew a predator lurked in the shadows. Fatigue was a constant companion, but he couldn't rest. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Malone," he answered, his voice tense. "Detective, I have information about the killer. Meet me at Warehouse 12, near the port, in an hour." "Come alone." The voice was hoarse, familiar somehow, but Jack couldn't place it before the call ended. Jack grabbed his coat and left quickly, leaving a note for Laura in case something went wrong. Upon arriving at Warehouse 12, the place was deserted and silent, except for the sound of waves breaking on the pier. Jack walked cautiously through the dark warehouse, his eyes alert for any movement. "Malone here?" whispered a voice from a shadow. A thin man with a nervous look emerged from the darkness. "Who are you?" Jack asked, keeping his hand close to his weapon. "It doesn't matter. What matters is I know who the killer is." "He's closer than you think," said the man, handing him a bulky envelope. "Here are the details. But be careful, he knows you're after him." Before Jack could ask more questions, the man disappeared into the darkness. Back at the precinct, he opened the envelope and found a series of documents, including photos, medical records, and detailed notes about the victims. "Laura, we need to see this," Jack said, calling his partner. Together, they began to analyze the documents. These medical records, all the victims had some connection to St. Mary's Hospital. "It's a common point we hadn't noticed before," said Laura, surprised. Jack agreed, his mind racing. "And these photos? They're of hospital staff. Do you recognize anyone?" Laura examined the photos. "Yes, that's Dr. Harris, the criminology professor. And here's Evelyn Brooks. It looks like she worked as a nurse there a few years ago." The connection began to form in Jack's mind. "We need to investigate the hospital. Something happened there that links all these people." The next morning, Jack and Laura went to St. Mary's Hospital. They talked to both former and current staff, trying to uncover any relevant information. An elderly nurse, who was about to retire, finally provided a crucial clue. I remember a strange incident a few years ago. A patient died during surgery, and there was a lot of speculation about negligence. The surgeon responsible was Dr. Leonard Harris. After that, he stopped practicing medicine and started teaching criminology, said the nurse, her eyes filled with dark memories. Jack and Laura exchanged glances. We need to talk to Harris again, said Jack, determined. They went to the university where Harris taught. They found him in his office, surrounded by books and crime scene diagrams. The professor seemed calm, but there was something in his eyes that unsettled Jack. Dr. Harris, we need to talk about St. Mary's Hospital and the patient who died under your care, Jack said directly. Harris smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a tragic accident, but it has no relation to the murders, detective. You're lying. We know all the victims had some connection to the hospital, Laura challenged. Harris maintained his smile, but his eyes gleamed with hidden malice. You're chasing ghosts, detectives. I wish you good luck. Leaving Harris's office, Jack felt a knot in his stomach. He's involved, Laura, but we need more proof. As they prepared to leave the university, Jack received a text message. Be careful who you trust. The enemy is closer than you think. The sender was unknown. What do you make of this? Laura asked, worried. I think we're in a nest of vipers. We need to be careful and keep our eyes open. The cat and mouse game is getting more dangerous, and anyone could be the next target? Jack responded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. As night fell again over Los Angeles, Jack knew the killer was getting closer. The informant had revealed just the tip of the iceberg, and the real battle was just beginning. Chapter 5, Endless Night. The lights of Los Angeles flickered like stars on the ground as Jack Malone delved deeper into the darkness of the killer's mind. The nights had become endless, filled with nightmares and memories of the victims. He was obsessed, determined to solve the case at any cost, even if it meant sacrificing his own sanity. In his small apartment, Jack reviewed every detail of the files, muttering to himself. The walls were covered with photos of crime scenes, maps, and notes. The faces of each victim stared at him, demanding justice. Jack stubbed out his cigarette and grabbed another coffee, his eyes tired but full of determination. Laura Bennett entered the apartment, carrying a stack of documents. Jack, you need to rest. You're killing yourself with this obsession. I can't rest, Laura. This killer is always one step ahead. He knows our moves. I need to understand his mind before he claims another victim, Jack replied, not taking his eyes off the papers. I brought the personnel records from St. Mary's Hospital. Maybe there's something we missed, Laura said, spreading the documents on the table. As they sifted through the records, a name caught Jack's attention. Dr. Michael Cross. This name appears in several patient transfers. He was present at critical moments. Laura frowned. Michael Cross. It looks like he left the hospital just before the murders started. Maybe we should talk to him. Jack nodded, his eyes gleaming with new hope. Let's find him. He could be the missing piece. They found Dr. Cross at a small clinic on the outskirts of the city. He was a tired-looking man, with gray hair and deep-set eyes. When the detectives introduced themselves, he seemed surprised but invited them in. Dr. Cross, we need to talk about St. Mary's Hospital and the patients who died under your supervision. Jack began, watching the doctor's reactions closely. Cross sighed, seeming to carry a tremendous weight. It was a difficult time. There were many mistakes, many secrets. The hospital tried to cover everything up. What do you know about Leonard Harris and the death of a patient during surgery? Laura asked. Cross hesitated but finally spoke. Harris was always ambitious, but something changed after that incident. He started isolating himself, obsessively studying. I'd see him at the hospital many nights, even when he had no surgeries. He had a morbid fascination with death. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. Do you think he could be involved in the murders? I can't prove anything, but there was something dark about him. I always suspected, but never had the courage to confront him. If he's behind this, you need to be very careful. Harris is dangerous, Cross said, his voice low and filled with fear. Back at the precinct, Jack and Laura began piecing together the puzzle. Each new bit of information brought them closer to the truth, but also increased the danger. Jack felt like he was being watched, that every step was being monitored. We need a plan, Jack. Something that gives us an advantage over Harris, Laura said. Worry etched on her face. Jack nodded. We'll pressure Harris, but discreetly. We need more evidence before we can arrest him. The night wore on as Jack continued to work, his eyes burning with exhaustion. The images of the victims and the details of the crimes danced in his mind, creating a maze of terror. He knew time was running out and the killer's next move could be fatal. Suddenly, a knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Sergeant Davis with a grim expression. Jack, we found another body. Same signature. Jack felt his stomach turn. Where? Downtown in an abandoned hotel. We need you there, Davis said. Jack grabbed his coat and looked at Laura. Let's go. The game continues. At the hotel, the scene was macabre. The body was arranged ritualistically, surrounded by candles and with a black rose beside it. Jack felt the familiar wave of anger and determination. As he observed the scene, a sense of déjà vu washed over him. Something about this murder felt different, more personal. The killer was getting closer, leaving more obvious clues, almost daring Jack to find him. He's getting bolder. He knows we're close, Jack said, his eyes fixed on the black rose. Laura looked at Jack, her concern evident. What if he's leading us into a trap? Jack smiled darkly. Then we'll play his game and see who wins. The endless night continued, each moment bringing them closer to the truth and the final confrontation. Jack knew the hunt was only beginning, and he was ready to face any shadow that emerged along the way. Chapter 6. The Trap. The full moon illuminated the streets of Los Angeles as Jack Malone and Laura Bennett devised a plan to capture the killer. Tension hung in the air, and Jack knew they had to be meticulous. Every move had to be calculated, every detail planned. The killer was becoming bolder, and it was time to strike back. We need to use bait, Jack said, looking at Laura. Someone he can't resist. Someone who fits the profile of the victims. Laura nodded, understanding what was coming. I volunteer, Jack. He's seen me before and knows I'm involved in the investigation. That might lure him out. Jack hesitated, fear evident in his eyes. Laura, this is dangerous. He's unpredictable and extremely dangerous. I know, Jack, but it's our best chance. We need to catch him, and fast, Laura replied, determined. With the plan set, they began the preparations. They chose a strategic location, a deserted park in the city center, with several hidden surveillance points. Police teams were positioned at key spots, ready to act at the slightest hint of danger. Jack felt the pressure but trusted his team. On the appointed night, Laura was in the park, walking slowly along the path illuminated only by the moonlight. Jack, hidden in a nearby surveillance van, watched every movement through the security cameras. His heart raced, and he felt the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Laura, stay calm and alert. We're all here, Jack said over the radio, trying to convey confidence. Understood, Jack. I'm ready, Laura replied, her voice steady. Time seemed to drag as Laura continued to walk through the park. The silence was unsettling, broken only by the sound of her footsteps on the damp grass. Jack kept his eyes on the screens, looking for any sign of the killer. Suddenly, a shadowy figure emerged from the trees, moving silently toward Laura. Jack recognized him immediately, the man in the hat and long coat. He's coming, Laura. Be ready, Jack whispered into the radio. Laura kept walking, pretending not to notice the presence behind her. When the man was just a few meters away, she stopped and turned slowly. Who's there? Laura asked, her voice firm but controlled. The man advanced and Jack gave the signal to the team. Officers emerged from their hiding places, quickly surrounding the killer. But before they could reach him, the man drew a knife and grabbed Laura, holding the blade to her neck. Drop your weapons or she dies, the man growled, his voice cold and calculating. Jack stepped out of the van, his hands raised. "Easy, no one needs to get hurt. We can work this out." The man looked at Jack, a cruel smile forming on his lips. "You think you can catch me, detective? I'm always one step ahead." Laura seized the distraction and, with a swift move, disarmed the man, knocking the knife to the ground. The officers rushed in, pinning the killer down. Jack ran to Laura, relief visible in his eyes. "Are you all right?" "Yes, Jack. We did it," Laura said, panting but smiling. The man was taken into custody, but Jack knew the work was far from over. They needed to interrogate him and uncover all his motives. At the precinct, the killer, identified as Leonard Harris, sat in the interrogation room, handcuffed to the table. Jack and Laura entered, ready to uncover the secrets he held. "Why did you do this, Harris? What's your goal?" Jack asked, looking directly into the cold eyes of the man. Harris smiled, a smile that sent chills down Jack's spine. "You think you've caught me, but this is just the beginning. There are more secrets buried in this city than you can imagine." Laura frowned. "What do you mean by that?" Harris leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with uncontrollable madness. "I'm not the only one. There are others like me, and you will never be safe. This is just the start of the game." Jack felt a chill. "You're bluffing. We caught you, and we'll catch the others too." Harris laughed, a cold and disturbing laugh. "Good luck, detective. You're going to need it." As Harris was led back to his cell, Jack and Laura stood in silence, processing his words. The game was far from over, and the shadow of threat loomed over them. "We'll find out who the others are, Laura. We won't stop until they're all behind bars," Jack said, determination burning in his eyes. "Yes, Jack, we're in this together. And we'll win," Laura replied, holding her partner's hand firmly. The night grew even darker, but Jack and Laura knew they were ready to face any shadow that emerged in their path. The trap had worked, but the real battle was just beginning. Chapter 7: Masks Fall. Los Angeles awakened under a gray sky, the city still shaken by recent events. Jack Malone and Laura Bennett knew time was crucial. Leonard Harris's arrest had revealed a web more complex than they had imagined. While Harris was in custody, the real challenge was to uncover who else was involved. At the precinct, Jack and Laura met in the interrogation room, ready for another round with Harris. The atmosphere was tense, and Harris, handcuffed to the table, watched them with a sinister smile. "So, detectives, ready for the next round?" Harris taunted, his eyes gleaming with a restrained madness. "Enough games, Harris. You said you weren't alone. Who are the others?" Jack asked, his voice firm. Harris leaned forward, his eyes locked on Jack's. "You don't understand, do you? This is much bigger than you two. Many layers, many masks." Laura crossed her arms, impatient. "Explain. Who are they? Why are they doing this?" Harris chuckled softly. "You think you can just ask and get answers? It doesn't work that way. But I'll give you a clue. You already know one of the masks." Jack and Laura exchanged glances, trying to decipher the riddle. Suddenly, Laura had an idea. "Evelyn Brooks. She's always been a piece of this puzzle." Jack nodded, feeling a knot in his stomach. "We need to talk to her." With Harris locked up again, Jack and Laura headed to Evelyn Brooks's apartment. When they arrived, they found the door ajar, which was already a bad sign. Jack drew his gun, signaling Laura to stay behind him as he pushed the door open. The apartment was a mess, as if someone had left in a hurry. Books and papers were scattered across the floor, and there was an eerie feeling of being watched. Jack entered cautiously, his senses on high alert. "Evelyn? Los Angeles police. Come out with your hands visible," Jack called, his voice echoing in the silence. Suddenly, a noise came from the bedroom. Jack and Laura approached, ready for anything. When they opened the door, they found Evelyn, pale and frightened, holding a revolver. "Don't come any closer. I didn't do anything," she screamed, her eyes wide with fear. "Evelyn, we're here to help. Put the gun down and let's talk," Jack said, trying to calm her. She hesitated but finally dropped the gun, collapsing to her knees, sobbing. I didn't want to get involved. He forced me. Laura knelt beside her. Who, Evelyn? Harris. No, Harris was just a tool. The real mastermind is someone more powerful. He controls everything, manipulates us like puppets, Evelyn said, her voice trembling. Jack looked at Laura, understanding the gravity of the situation. Who is this man? We need a name. Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to control her panic. His name is Victor Reynolds. He's a magnate, owns several companies in the city, uses his influence to cover up his crimes. Harris was just one of his pawns. Jack felt a chill. Victor Reynolds was a well-known name, a respected businessman and philanthropist. The revelation seemed surreal, but it made sense. Reynolds had the resources and influence to orchestrate something so complex. We need to take this information to the precinct and start an official investigation into Reynolds, Jack said, helping Evelyn to her feet. Back at the precinct, Jack and Laura began building the case against Victor Reynolds. They knew it would be a tough battle, as they were dealing with someone extremely powerful. While preparing the documentation, they received an urgent call from Sergeant Davis. Jack, we have a problem. Harris was found dead in his cell. It looks like suicide, but something's off, Davis said, his voice grave. Jack felt a wave of frustration. We're on our way. When they arrived at Harris's cell, they found the body hanging, but something seemed wrong. There were no signs of a struggle, but the scene looked staged. Laura examined the cell and found a note hidden in the mattress. He knew this might happen. He left a message, Laura said, handing the note to Jack. The note read, "If you're reading this, it means he found me first. He will never be caught unless you unmask everyone. Be careful whom you trust." Jack felt the weight of the situation. We're dealing with someone very dangerous. We need to be cautious. Laura agreed. We'll continue the investigation, but carefully. We need concrete evidence against Reynolds. As night advanced, Jack and Laura knew they were stepping into a dangerous game. The masks were falling, revealing a network of corruption and power. But they were determined to dismantle Victor Reynolds' empire, no matter the cost. The true confrontation was yet to come, and they needed to be prepared. Chapter 8. The Final Confrontation. The streets of Los Angeles were shrouded in a thick fog as Jack Malone and Laura Bennett prepared for the final confrontation with Victor Reynolds. The discovery of Harris dead in his cell had confirmed their suspicions. They were dealing with someone who wouldn't hesitate to kill to protect his secrets. Jack knew this would be the decisive night, where all masks would fall. Back at the precinct, Jack and Laura gathered their trusted team. We have enough evidence to confront Reynolds, but we need to be careful. He has eyes and ears all over the city, Jack said, looking at each of the officers. We'll get him, Chief. We're with you, replied Sergeant Davis, his face determined. The plan was simple but risky. They would use Evelyn Brooks as bait to lure Reynolds to a safe location where they could confront him without interference from his bodyguards. Evelyn agreed to help, knowing her life was also in danger. They chose an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, away from prying eyes. Jack and Laura positioned the team in strategic points, ready to act at the slightest hint of danger. The tension was palpable, and Jack felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Evelyn, are you sure you want to do this? Jack asked, concern evident in his voice. I have no choice, Jack. I want to end this as much as you do, Evelyn replied, determined. The night was cold and silent when Evelyn entered the warehouse, pretending to be desperate. Minutes later, a luxury car pulled up at the entrance, and Victor Reynolds stepped out, accompanied by 2 bodyguards. He seemed calm, but his eyes betrayed a calculated malice. Evelyn, my dear, what's happening? Why did you call me here? Reynolds asked, approaching her. I can't take it anymore, Victor. I need help. Things are spiraling out of control, Evelyn said, trembling. Reynolds smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You did well to call me. I always take care of my own. At that moment, Jack and Laura stepped out of the shadows, guns drawn. It's over, Reynolds. We know everything. You're under arrest, Jack said, his voice firm. Reynolds slowly raised his hands, the smile fading. You think you can catch me so easily?
I kontroll til City.
You are nothing. Reynolds's bodyguards drew their guns, but Jack's team acted swiftly, immobilizing them before they could react. Jack walked up to Reynolds, forcefully cuffing him. You're finished, Reynolds. Harris may have been a pawn, but now we have the full picture, Jack said, feeling a wave of relief. Reynolds laughed, a cold and humorless laugh. You don't understand, detective. Arresting me changes nothing. There are others like me, spread throughout the city. You'll never catch them all. Laura looked at Jack, determination clear in her eyes. Then we'll keep searching until we find them, one by one. As they led Reynolds to the car, Jack felt a strange calm. The battle was far from over, but this was a significant step. Back at the precinct, they began interrogating Reynolds, which proved more challenging than they had imagined. He was calculating and refused to reveal any information. You can keep me here as long as you want, detective, but you'll never get what you want, Reynolds said defiantly. Jack knew they needed a new approach. Laura, we need to press his associates. Someone will talk. In the days that followed, Jack and Laura interrogated several of Reynolds's associates, unraveling a web of corruption and power that stretched across the city. With each new discovery, it became clear that Reynolds was not the only one, but a central piece in a larger scheme. Finally, they obtained a confession from one of Reynolds's accomplices, who revealed details about a network of trafficking and murders that Reynolds commanded. With this information, they secured a solid conviction against him. In court, Reynolds remained calm, but Jack knew the impact of his arrest would be felt throughout the city. It was a significant victory, but the battle against crime was far from over. You did a great job, Jack, Laura said as they left the courthouse. We did, Laura, and we'll keep doing it. We won't stop until we clean up the city, Jack replied, determined. As Los Angeles began to recover from the revelations, Jack knew there was more work ahead. But with Laura by his side and a dedicated team, he was ready to face any challenge. The final confrontation with Reynolds had been a victory, but the true fight for justice was just beginning. Chapter 9: Echoes of the Past. The echoes of recent events still reverberated through the streets of Los Angeles. Victor Reynolds' arrest had exposed a network of corruption and murder that shook the city to its core. But for Jack Malone and Laura Bennett, the sense of accomplishment came with a new understanding of the ongoing battle against crime. Jack looked over the city from the rooftop of the precinct, a view he knew well but which now seemed different. There was a tense calm in the air, like the stillness before a storm. Laura approached him, handing over a cup of coffee. Thinking about what comes next? Laura asked with a slight smile. Yeah, there's always more, isn't there? This case was just the tip of the iceberg. We have a lot of work ahead of us, Jack replied, taking a sip of the coffee. We'll handle it, Jack. We always do, Laura said with confidence. Back in the office, Jack reviewed the files of Reynolds' associates still under investigation. Reynolds' arrest had dismantled a significant part of the criminal network, but they knew there were more leaders to capture and more secrets to uncover. A phone call interrupted his thoughts. It was Sergeant Davis, his voice filled with urgency. Jack, we need you at a crime scene. There's something you need to see. When Jack and Laura arrived at the location, they found a crime scene different from the previous ones. There was no macabre signature of a black rose, but the victim, an informant who had collaborated with them on the Reynolds case, was clearly marked to send a message. He knew too much, Jack said, examining the scene. Someone is trying to scare us, but this just proves we're on the right track. Laura found a note near the body, handwritten. This is just the beginning. You can't stop us. Jack felt frustration but also determination. They're trying to intimidate us. We need to be faster and smarter. Back at the precinct, Jack and Laura gathered the team to devise a plan. They needed to act before more lives were lost. They began mapping the remaining connections, identifying priority targets and potential meeting points of the criminal network. We're going to take them all down one by one. We can't let Reynolds and his accomplices think they've won, Jack said, motivating the team. The following weeks were intense. Jack and Laura led operations across the city, dismantling criminal cells, arresting henchmen, and collecting evidence. With each arrest, the network unraveled a little more, and the sense of justice grew. One of the critical moments came when they discovered a stash of incriminating documents in an abandoned warehouse. The files contained details about illegal transactions, bribes, and other crimes committed by Reynolds' network. With this evidence, they strengthened their cases against the remaining members of the organization. In court, the presentation of the evidence resulted in multiple convictions. The impact of their operations was felt throughout the city, and public confidence in the police began to be restored. Jack and Laura, exhausted but satisfied, watched as the criminals were taken away to serve their sentences. "We did it, Jack. We made a difference," Laura said, relief evident in her voice. "Yes, we did. But we need to stay vigilant. The city still needs us," Jack replied, knowing the fight against crime was never ending. As they walked through the streets of Los Angeles, now a bit safer thanks to their efforts, Jack reflected on the echoes of the past. The victims they couldn't save, the battles fought, and the sacrifices made. Every step forward was a tribute to them. "Let's take some time to breathe, Laura. But just a little. The city doesn't sleep, and neither can we," Jack said with a tired smile. "I agree, partner. But for now, a bit of peace is welcome," Laura replied as they walked together, ready for whatever came next. The case of Victor Reynolds had come to an end, but for Jack Malone and Laura Bennett, the mission to protect Los Angeles continued. And as long as there were shadows to face, they would be there, ready to bring light to the darkness.